Happy Friday once again, friends. This week we've begun Book 2 of the Psalter. Turn your attention with me to Psalm 45. If you haven't read it yet, go ahead and pause the video and read it. I do have a couple of reflections from this psalm. It's very different than any of the psalms we have read thus far. In fact, our Holman Christian Standard Bible puts a heading entitling a royal wedding song. In the Old Testament, this kind of writing was rather common. Coronations of the king, weddings of a king would not just be personal events, they would be state and national events. And so the people would love to celebrate with their king. In fact, people would write songs of praise to the king, and they would be recorded as part of the king's legacy. In fact, we see poetic language. You are the most handsome of men. We see kind of extreme hyperbolic language honoring an individual. That's what makes this psalm so odd to me, is that it seems to praise the king more than it praises God himself. This song is probably a song written for David's wedding. We have reason to believe that this is probably applicable to King David. But I want to highlight something about the throne of Israel. In Israel, unlike the rest of the world, God anointed a king over his chosen people. And so in many ways, the Old Testament king of Israel was viewed not only as an under-regent, but in many ways as a co-regent. God is reigning over his chosen people, and God establishes a king to reign with him and for him over his chosen people. I want to think about that for just a moment, because when we talk about this throne, we see in verse 6, we're referring to the throne itself. In many ways, this applies to David, but it also applies to the Messiah, who would sit on that throne forever. Put a pin in that. I want to come back. But in addition to addressing the king himself, this psalm also addresses his bride. And we see here, listen, daughter, pay attention, forget your people's household, forget your father's household, and come into the throne room of the king, and come and be with him. Bow down, for he is your Lord. You and your maidens and your beautiful colored robes, come into the majesty of the king, and be a part of his household now, because he is your Lord, he's your king, and he's your husband. So, go back to verse 6, where it talks about this throne that God is establishing forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is a scepter of justice. If we understand that this may be referring to the messianic throne for eternity, we can also understand a little bit more clearly, because we as the church are the bride of Christ. So we are this bride of the Messiah. What a beautiful picture that is, for us to come into the presence of Jesus and to worship him as our Lord and to be his bride forever. That's amazing. I want to refer back to verse 4. Another thing that set Israel apart from the other nations of that day was the word humility. In verse 4, we see humility. Kings of David's day were not humble kings. Leaders, political leaders, national leaders of our day are not humble leaders. But what set David apart, what set God's anointed man apart, was that he was to be a man known for his humility. And may that be true of us as God's people today. I look forward to being with you again very soon. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. God bless.